My name is Sophia Miller, and if anyone had told me that one day I would be dragged into a courtroom by my own brother, accused of stealing the very home I had built with my own two hands, I would have called them crazy. But life has a way of showing you who people really are, especially when money and property are involved. This isn't a story about some random dispute with a stranger. It's about betrayal from someone who shared my blood, my childhood, my family. It's about my brother Ethan, who decided that the villa I had worked years to buy somehow belonged to him, and who convinced my parents to stand by his side in court. When the lawsuit first arrived, I was paralyzed. I thought it had to be a mistake, some clerical error. But no, it was real. Ethan wanted my villa, and he was willing to destroy our family to get it. I didn't cry, I didn't beg, because when it comes down to it, tears don't win cases. Evidence does. And when I brought the truth into that courtroom, nobody, least of all Ethan, was prepared for what came next. But before I tell you how the judge ruled, I need to take you back to the beginning, to the day I first stepped into the house that would become both my sanctuary and the battlefield for my family's betrayal. I was 34 when I bought the villa. It sat just outside Portland, Oregon, on a quiet street framed by towering cedar trees and the soft hum of the Willamette River not too far away. The house wasn't some sprawling mansion out of a magazine, but it was perfect. White stone walls, a green tiled roof, wide glass windows that flooded the rooms with sunlight, and a balcony that overlooked the distant hills. For anyone else, it might have been just another house, but for me, it was a symbol. Every beam, every tile, every brick represented 12 years of late nights drafting blueprints, taking on extra projects as an architect, saving instead of spending, sacrificing vacations and nights out with friends. The villa wasn't just a property. It was proof that I was capable, independent, and strong proof that I didn't need anyone else to define me. The villa wasn't just a property. It was proof that I was capable, independent, and strong proof that I didn't need anyone else to define me. The first night after signing the contract, I dragged a blanket onto the floor of the living room and lay by the fireplace. I didn't even bother with the bedroom. I just wanted to feel the house around me, to breathe it in. I remember staring at the ceiling beams and whispering to myself, "This is it. This is home." And in that moment, I felt whole. Naturally, I wanted to share that moment with my family. For as long as I could remember, I had been the invisible one in their eyes. My brother Ethan was the golden child, the one with charisma, the one who charmed his way into attention, the one my parents bragged about. And me? I was the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who never asked for anything and therefore never received much recognition. But I thought maybe, just maybe, things would be different this time. Maybe when they saw the villa, they'd finally see me. So I invited them to dinner. I spent the whole day preparing rosemary chicken, roasted vegetables, a bottle of red wine I'd been saving. I set the table with linen napkins, placed fresh flowers in a vase by the window, lit candles so the whole place glowed with warmth. I wanted them to be proud, not just of the house, but of me. When the doorbell rang, my heart fluttered, but the moment they stepped inside, the air shifted. My mother looked around with the sharp, critical eyes of someone evaluating a purchase. My father nodded once, his face unreadable. And then Ethan strolled in tailored suit, slicked back hair, the faint smell of expensive cologne. "Nice place, Soph," he said casually, scanning the living room like he already owned it. "But don't you think it's a little too much for just one person?" I laughed awkwardly, brushing it off. But the words lodged in my chest like a splinter. Dinner didn't go much better. My parents asked Ethan about his business ventures, hanging on every vague but impressive-sounding story he spun. They barely asked me a single question about the villa or my work or how I had managed to make this dream real. Finally, my father set down his fork and cleared his throat. You know, Sophia, it might be a good idea to let Ethan stay here for a while. He's had a tough time lately. This house is too big for one person anyway. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. Before I could respond, my mother chimed in. Exactly. You're unmarried, no children. What do you even need all this space for? Their words sliced through me, sharper than any blade. I swallowed hard, forced a polite smile, and said nothing. But inside, something cracked, because in their eyes, this house was never truly mine. And that dinner, though I didn't know it at the time, was the first step toward the betrayal that would tear us apart and drag us all into a courtroom where every secret would be exposed. The envelope came on a gray Tuesday morning, thick and official-looking, with the words, Multnomah County Circuit Court, stamped in bold across the top. At first, I thought it was junk mail, a notice about property taxes maybe, or an update on zoning laws, but when I tore it open, the air seemed to vanish from the room. Plaintiffs, Richard Miller and Catherine Miller. Co-plaintiff, Ethan Miller. Defendant, Sophia Miller. My name, right there, on a lawsuit filed by my own parents and my brother. I read the lines again and again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less cruel, but they didn't. They stayed fixed on the page like scars. The charge? Unlawful possession of family property, breach of implied agreement to provide co-residency to elder brother. It was absurd. I had never promised Ethan anything. I had never even joked about letting him move in. Yet here it was, written in legal language, stamped and signed, as though my silence at that dinner table had been twisted into consent. For a long time, I just sat at the kitchen counter, staring at the papers while the morning sun cut across the marble surface. My coffee grew cold. My hands trembled. It felt like betrayal had a physical weight, thick and suffocating, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. That night, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their signatures at the bottom of the complaint, my father's neat, businesslike scrawl, my mother's tight cursive, and Ethan's bold, confident loop, written as though he were proud of what he was doing. By midnight, I finally picked up the phone and called the only person I trusted enough to hear the words out loud. Lena Torres, my closest friend since college. She answered on the second ring. Sophia, what's wrong? I could barely form the sentence. Lena, I think my family is suing me. Silence, then sharper. What do you mean, suing you? I read her the charges, my voice shaking. When I finished, she let out a low whistle. This isn't just family drama, this is legal theft. They're trying to build a case that your villa isn't really yours. I bought it with my own money, I whispered. I have the deed, the mortgage, everything. Then you need to gather it all, every scrap of proof, and you'll need a lawyer who can fight them in court. The next morning, still numb, I drove downtown to the address listed on the complaint, the law firm representing my brother. The office was sleek, glass walls and polished floors, full of people in suits who looked like they'd never missed a meal. I asked to speak with someone about the case. They sent out a junior associate, a man barely in his 30s with tired eyes and a crooked tie. He flipped through my summons with the indifference of someone who'd seen too many families tear themselves apart. You'll want your own counsel, he said flatly, but I can tell you this much. The petition was filed 2 weeks ago. Your brother has already spoken publicly about it. My stomach dropped. Publicly? Where? Local podcast, he replied. He said you abandoned him in his time of need, that you broke a promise to provide him housing during a difficult transition. I laughed bitterly. He's never spent a single night here. The associate shrugged. Then you'll need evidence. The court won't take your word for it. I walked out of that office with fury burning in my chest. Ethan hadn't just filed a lawsuit. He was shaping a narrative casting himself as the victim, me as the cold, selfish sister. On the drive home, the steering wheel dug into my palms as I gripped it too tightly. The villa came into view, sunlight glinting off its windows, and for the first time since I'd bought it, I felt a flicker of fear. Because now I understood this wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a declaration of war. That night, I pulled out a metal lockbox from under my bed. Inside were manila folders stuffed with every major document from the past 5 years: the deed, the purchase agreement, mortgage statements, insurance policies. Proof that the villa was mine, down to the last cent. I spread them out on the kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle. But the more I looked, the more I realized I would need more than just paperwork. I would need witnesses, records, testimonies, evidence so strong it couldn't be twisted into lies. And most of all, I would need the courage to stand in court, look my brother in the eye and say, "No, you don't get to take what I built." As I stacked the papers back into neat piles, I thought of that dinner night the way my parents had looked at the villa as though it were already theirs. The way Ethan had smirked as if he belonged there. It wasn't an accident. It had been planned. And now, they were coming for me. The night after I received the summons, sleep became impossible. I tossed and turned, replaying the same questions in my head. How could they do this to me? Why now? Why Ethan? But somewhere around 3 a.m., I realized that asking why wouldn't help me win. I needed to focus on how. How to prove beyond any doubt that the villa belonged solely to me. The next morning, I cleared the kitchen table, laid out my folders, and began assembling my defense like a general preparing for battle. First came the deed, my name, Sophia Miller, in bold black ink, stamped with the county clerk's seal. Next, the purchase agreement, showing the cashier's check I had written for the down payment. I remembered holding that pen with trembling fingers, knowing that a decade of savings was leaving my account in one swoop, but also knowing it was worth every penny. I stacked mortgage statements beside it, every single payment made on time, with my signature at the bottom of each receipt. By the time I was done, the table was covered in proof, but still a knot tightened in my stomach. Paperwork was strong, yes, but lies had a way of twisting truth. Ethan's story that I had promised him a place, that the house was family property, would need to be dismantled piece by piece. I needed people who could testify, people who could speak the truth when I couldn't. So I started knocking on doors. The first was my neighbor across the street, Mrs. Thompson. A retired school teacher in her 70s, she'd been watching over the neighborhood since long before I moved in. When I explained what was happening, her eyes widened in disbelief. Ethan? Living here? Dear, I've barely seen that boy visit. If he did, it was for 20 minutes at most. He doesn't even know where your mailbox is. I laughed despite myself. She signed a statement right there at her kitchen counter, her handwriting shaky but firm. Next, I went to the post office. The clerk pulled up address records and confirmed. Ethan's name had never been tied to my villa until just last month. Someone had filed a sudden change of address request. My chest burned. They were trying to rewrite history, piece by piece. At the utility company, I asked for account records. The manager printed a thick stack for me, all accounts in my name alone, from the very first day I moved in. Not one bill, not one meter reading had ever been linked to Ethan. I added those to the growing pile of evidence, but still, I needed more. Something irrefutable. Later that week, as I was sorting through unopened mail, I froze. One envelope addressed to Ethan Miller, but delivered to my villa. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a bank statement, and under legal residence, my address was listed. My pulse quickened. He had told the bank he lived here, but how? I drove straight to the branch, demanded answers. The young teller hesitated, then pulled up the account on his screen. According to our records, Ethan Miller submitted a notarized lease agreement last month confirming his residence at this address. I felt my stomach drop. That's impossible. I never signed a lease. This is my home. He shifted uncomfortably. The document was signed by Catherine Miller. That's your mother, correct? For a moment, the world tilted. My mother. She had signed a fake lease agreement, claiming to be the property owner, leasing my villa to my brother. It wasn't just Ethan. My parents were in on it too. I walked out of that bank with the statement clutched in my hands, fury boiling through me. The betrayal ran deeper than I had imagined. That night, as I sifted through evidence, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Ms. Miller? The voice was low, hesitant. You don't know me. My name is Sarah Collins. I used to work at the law firm representing your brother. I froze. Go on. I saw your file come through, and I recognized something. 5 years ago, I handled paperwork for your grandfather's estate. At the time, your name was listed as a beneficiary. Then suddenly, in the final draft, it was gone, replaced with Ethan's. My throat went dry. You're saying the will was changed? Yes, she said firmly, and I believe it wasn't a clerical error. I have copies of the drafts. If you want them, I'll meet you, off the record. The next morning, we met at a small cafe downtown. She slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were 2 versions of my grandfather's will. The first, my name, alongside Ethan's. The second, my name erased, Ethan's expanded share printed neatly where mine had been. The date stamps were identical. The notary seal belonged to the very same firm that now represented Ethan. I sat there in silence, staring at the papers, my heart pounding. This wasn't just about my villa. This was a pattern, a trail of fraud stretching back years. For the first time, I felt a shift inside me. I wasn't just defending my home anymore. I was about to uncover a truth my family had buried long ago, and I knew then I wouldn't stop until every piece of it came to light. The courthouse in downtown Portland looked like something out of another century. Heavy stone columns, wide wooden doors, echoing hallways that smelled faintly of old paper and polish. I had driven past it countless times in my life, never imagining I would one day walk through those doors to defend my right to my own home. I arrived early, clutching a thick binder of documents. Lena walked beside me, her dark hair pulled back, her navy suit sharp and immaculate. She carried herself with the calm confidence of someone who had been in courtrooms before, even though this case cut closer to the bone than most. Remember, she whispered as we walked up the marble steps, stay steady. Let the evidence speak. Don't let emotions pull you off track. Easier said than done. Because as soon as we entered the hallway outside courtroom 4B, I saw them. My parents, sitting together on a bench, dressed as if they were attending church. My father's jaw was set, his eyes fixed straight ahead. My mother avoided my gaze entirely, her pearl earrings catching the fluorescent light. And then Ethan leaning casually against the wall in a tailored gray suit, his hair slicked back, a leather briefcase dangling from his hand like some prop in a performance. For a moment, my breath caught. I almost searched for the boy I grew up with, the brother who once shared ice cream with me on summer afternoons, who played tag with me in the yard. But his eyes slid past me like I was a stranger. The bailiff called the case. Miller versus Miller, plaintiff seeking possession of property currently held by defendant. We filed into the courtroom. I took my seat at the defendant's table, my palms pressed against the cool wood, trying to ground myself. The judge entered, an older man with silver hair and a stern, unreadable expression. He adjusted his glasses, glanced at the docket, and began. This matter concerns claims of implied family housing agreements and contested property ownership. Plaintiffs, you may begin. Ethan's lawyer, a man named Talbot, rose smoothly. His voice was polished, rehearsed. Your Honor, my clients merely wish to resolve a long-standing family misunderstanding. Mr. Ethan Miller was promised by his sister a place to live during a period of financial hardship. She has since reneged on that promise, leaving him without stability. We ask the court to enforce this implied agreement, honoring family commitments. I clenched my fists under the table. Family commitments? The only commitment I had made was to myself, to survive, to build. Then Ethan took the stand. He looked directly at the judge, his voice soft, even tremulous. My sister and I were always close. When I lost my job last year, she told me I could stay at her villa. But when I showed up, she wouldn't even let me in the door. I slept in my car that night. He paused, letting silence stretch. He even wiped at his eyes. This isn't about money for me, he continued. It's about family, about being cast aside when I needed her most. From the corner of my eye, I saw my mother dab at her eyes with a tissue. My father placed a hand on her knee, his expression hard, unwavering. Lena leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't react. Let him play his part. Our turn will come." When the judge finally turned to us, Lena stood and began laying out the evidence. She didn't rush. She moved methodically, building the foundation brick by brick. Your Honor, this is the deed sole ownership under Sophia Miller. These are mortgage statements, every payment made by her alone. These are utility bills, again, in her name, with no record of co-residency. And here, postal records confirming that until last month, Ethan Miller's name was never connected to this address. She handed each document to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. The stack grew steadily on his bench. Ethan's lawyer objected occasionally, but the judge allowed most of it. Then Lena brought out the bigger weapons, witness statements. Your Honor, Mrs. Thompson, the defendant's neighbor for 3 years, has testified in writing that she has never once seen Ethan Miller live at the property. Additional testimonies from the post office and utility companies corroborate this. Talbot shifted uncomfortably. Ethan's smirk had faded. But Lena wasn't done. She pulled out the forged lease agreement, her voice steady but sharp. This document was submitted to the Bank of Oregon, claiming Ethan Miller resided at my client's villa. The problem? The signature purporting to be Sophia Miller's is a forgery, and the document was notarized under the name Catherine Miller, the defendant's mother, who does not, and never has, owned the property. A ripple moved through the courtroom. The judge raised his eyebrows, his eyes flicking to my mother. She sat rigid, her face pale. Talbot stood quickly. Objection, relevance. Overruled, the judge said curtly. This goes to credibility. The air grew heavy. I sat there, silent, my heart pounding. This was only the beginning, but already the cracks were showing. By the time court adjourned for the day, the judge announced he would review the submissions and reconvene next week for further testimony. As we left, Ethan brushed past me, his voice low enough for only me to hear. You could have just handed it over, Soph. Now you're going to regret this. I met his eyes, my voice steady. No, Ethan. For once in my life, I won't. And as I walked out of that courthouse into the cold Portland air, binder clutched against my chest, I knew this wasn't just about property anymore. It was about the truth. And I was ready to fight for it, no matter how ugly it got. His voice was polished, rehearsed. The following week felt like living in a storm. Every time I looked at my villa, the white walls, the garden I had planted with my own hands, I felt a surge of both pride and dread. Pride that it was mine, dread that my own family was trying to rip it away. But even as I prepared for the next court date, I couldn't shake the words of the woman who had called me days earlier, Sarah Collins, the former paralegal from Ethan's law firm. She had hinted that what was happening now wasn't just about my villa. It was part of a longer trail, one that started years ago with my grandfather's will. The thought gnawed at me. I remembered when Grandpa Henry died 5 years earlier. He had always been kind to me, always encouraging me to pursue architecture, to build a life on my own terms. I had expected, maybe not much, but something in his will, a small inheritance, a token of acknowledgement. But when the will was read, Ethan received almost everything an investment account, a parcel of land, family heirlooms, and I received nothing. My parents said it was due to a clerical error that my name had been left off by mistake. "These things happen," my mother had said briskly, her lips tight. At the time, I swallowed the disappointment. I told myself money wasn't everything, but now, in light of this lawsuit, the pieces began to connect. I called Sarah. My voice was tight, urgent. "Are you sure about what you said? That my name was in the drafts?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes, I handled the files myself. I made a copy before I left the firm. If you want to see it, meet me tomorrow at the cafe on Alder Street, 10 a.m. I was there 20 minutes early, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee. When Sarah arrived, she carried a thin manila envelope. She slid it across the table like it was radioactive. Inside were 2 documents. The first draft, my name, Sophia Miller, listed alongside Ethan's. Grandpa had left us equal shares of his estate. The second draft, the same date, the same notary stamp, but my name had been erased. Ethan's share had doubled. The change wasn't sloppy. It wasn't a crossed-out line. It was clean, deliberate, professional. Too professional. My heart pounded in my ears as I looked up at Sarah. "Who changed this?" She took a deep breath. "Your mother. She came in that day, met with the senior partner. After she left his office, the file was different. I wasn't supposed to notice, but I did." I felt like the ground was tilting beneath me. My mother, the woman who gave birth to me, who raised me, had erased me from my own grandfather's will. Sarah's eyes softened. "If I'm called to testify, I'll tell the truth. I've held on to these copies for years, waiting for the right reason. I think this is it." I thanked her, my throat thick with emotion. As I drove back home, the papers beside me on the passenger seat, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just Ethan's scheme, this was my parents' doing too. They had orchestrated this long before the villa ever came into the picture. That evening, Lena came over. We spread the documents across my kitchen table, the same table where I had once dreamed my family might sit together, proud of me. "This changes everything," Lena said, her voice steady. "It's not just about property now. It's about fraud, forgery, and inheritance theft. The court needs to see this." I nodded, though my stomach churned. It's like I never mattered to them. Ethan was always the favorite, but this is calculated. Lena placed a hand on mine. "Sophia, you're not just fighting for your villa anymore. You're fighting to prove who they really are." I swallowed hard, staring at the 2 versions of the will. The neat black letters seemed to mock me. Years of love and loyalty erased with the stroke of a pen. The next court session was more intense than the first. Talbot strutted in, presenting Ethan again as the victim. My parents sat stiffly, avoiding my eyes, but when Lena stood, she brought out the envelope. "Your Honor, we submit 2 drafts of the late Henry Miller's will. One names my client as co-beneficiary. The second, executed on the same date, erases her entirely and gives the estate solely to Ethan Miller." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge's eyes narrowed as he examined the pages. Lena continued, "We also have a witness, Sarah Collins, former paralegal at the firm that this change occurred after a meeting between Catherine Miller, the defendant's mother, and the senior partner. She is prepared to testify under oath." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went pale, her hands clenched in her lap. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his confidence faltering. The judge looked up. "This is serious, very serious." And in that moment, I saw it, the first crack in their facade. For the first time, the truth was no longer buried. It was standing in the light, undeniable, unshakable. But the battle wasn't over. Not yet. As I left the courtroom that day, binder heavier than ever in my arms, I whispered to myself, "They thought they could erase me. They thought wrong." The morning of the final hearing, Portland was drenched in rain. Water streaked down the courthouse windows like silver threads, the air heavy with the kind of tension you could feel in your bones. I sat outside courtroom 4B with Lena, binder in my lap, my hands trembling not from fear, but from sheer adrenaline. This was it. Weeks of gathering documents, witness statements, bank records, and now the two versions of my grandfather's will. Everything pointed to one truth. My family had conspired to erase me. When the bailiff finally called our case, I stood on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Inside, the room was packed. A handful of curious spectators filled the benches, lawyers shuffled papers, and the judge adjusted his glasses with that same calm, unreadable face. My parents sat rigidly at the plaintiff's table, my father's jaw locked tight, my mother's hands folded so tightly they looked bloodless. Ethan leaned back in his chair, trying to look casual, but his eyes darted nervously. The judge began. Today, we hear final arguments in Miller versus Miller. Plaintiffs claim implied right of residence. Defendant contests on grounds of sole ownership and alleges fraud. Counsel, proceed. Talbot, Ethan's lawyer, stood first. His words were smooth, rehearsed, a performance meant to sway. Your Honor, this is a simple matter of compassion. A brother, left homeless, relying on a sister's promise. We are not contesting ownership outright. We merely seek recognition of Ethan Miller's right to share what has always been family property. He turned slightly, gesturing toward me. Is it not cruel, Your Honor, for one sibling to hoard a large home while another suffers? I bit my tongue, my nails digging into my palms. Then Ethan took the stand. He repeated the same story, his voice softer this time, rehearsed tears shimmering at the corners of his eyes. She said I could stay. She looked me in the eyes and promised, and then she locked me out. I slept in my car that night. He even bowed his head, his hand pressing dramatically against his chest. My mother sniffled, dabbing at her eyes. When he finished, the judge nodded. Defense. Lena rose gracefully. Her voice was calm, but every word landed like a hammer. Your Honor, my client has never made such a promise, and we will prove not only that, but also that the plaintiffs have engaged in a deliberate pattern of deceit. She began with the basics, the deed, the mortgage, the utility bills. Piece by piece, she stacked the evidence until the judge's desk was covered. Then she called witnesses. Mrs. Thompson, my elderly neighbor, testified firmly that she had never once seen Ethan live at the villa. The postal clerk confirmed that Ethan's name was only tied to my address last month. The utility manager stated every account was in my name alone. The cracks were widening. Ethan shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. But then Lena brought out the forged lease. This document was submitted to the Bank of Oregon, claiming Ethan Miller resided at my client's property. The alleged lesser signature is a forgery. And note, Your Honor, the signature of Catherine Miller, who has never owned this home, appears as landlord. The judge's eyes snapped to my mother. She sat frozen, her lips pressed so tightly they had gone white. Mrs. Miller, the judge said sternly, do you deny signing this? She said nothing. And then Lena delivered the final blow. She placed the two wills on the table. Your Honor, these are two drafts of the late Henry Miller's will. One includes my client, Sophia Miller, as co-beneficiary. The other, executed the same day, erases her entirely. We also present testimony from Sarah Collins, a former paralegal at the firm, who witnessed Catherine Miller meeting with the senior partner immediately before the alteration. The room went silent. The judge leaned forward, scanning the documents, his face grave. Mr. Miller, he said finally, his gaze locking on Ethan. Do you dispute this evidence? Ethan's Adam's apple bobbed. That's not relevant to this case. It speaks to credibility, the judge cut in. His voice was sharp now, no longer neutral. This court will not tolerate fraud, nor attempts to manipulate the law through false documents. Ethan's facade cracked. His confident mask crumbled, replaced by raw panic. He stammered, searching for words, but none came. For the first time, I let myself look straight at him, my brother, my blood. The boy I once trusted, now exposed as a liar before the entire court. When the judge finally adjourned, promising a written decision within the week, the air was thick with silence. As we stood, Ethan brushed past me. His voice was low, bitter, venomous. "You think you've won, Sophia. You've just destroyed this family." I turned to him, my voice steady, louder than his whisper. "No, Ethan, you destroyed it the day you chose greed over truth. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the invisible sister anymore. I felt seen, strong, ready. The battle was nearly over. But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever the decision, the truth had already come out, and there was no going back. The letter from the court arrived on a Thursday morning. The rain had finally broken, and sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows of my villa, painting golden rectangles across the marble floor. The envelope was thin, too thin to contain all the weight it carried. My hands shook as I slid a knife under the seal. Decision of the court. The property, located at 412 Cedar Hill Drive, shall remain in the sole ownership of the defendant, Sophia Miller. The plaintiff's claim of implied housing agreement is without merit. Further, the court finds evidence of fraudulent documentation and refers this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation. I read the words 3 times, each one cutting deeper into the fog of fear I had been living under. It was over. I had won. My knees gave out, and I sat right there on the kitchen floor, the letter trembling in my hands. The tears came, not of grief this time, but of release. A knock sounded at my door an hour later. It was Lena holding 2 cups of coffee. One look at my face, and she smiled knowingly. "You got it, didn't you?" I handed her the letter, unable to speak. She scanned it quickly, then let out a low laugh of satisfaction. Not just a win, a complete rejection. The judge didn't just dismiss their claim, he called them out. "That's rare, Sophia. Very rare." Her words warmed me, but beneath the relief was something heavier. I had kept my home, yes, but at what cost? The phone rang that afternoon. The caller ID, Mom. I hesitated before answering. Her voice was cold, clipped, as though she were speaking to a stranger. "Well, you got what you wanted." My throat tightened. What I wanted was to keep what was mine, and to stop you from lying about me in court. She exhaled sharply. "Family should come before property." I swallowed, my voice low but steady. Family should come before fraud. There was silence. Then the line went dead. I stood there staring at my phone, realizing this wasn't just a legal victory, it was the final fracture. A week later, I ran into Ethan in the parking lot of a grocery store. He was loading bags into the trunk of a rental car. He looked thinner, more tired, but his eyes still burned with resentment. "You could have just let it go," he muttered. "You didn't have to drag us through all this." I stared at him, almost incredulous. "Let it go? You forged documents. You tried to erase me. You stood in court and lied under oath." His jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to argue, but instead, he slammed the trunk shut and drove off without another word. Watching the car disappear down the street, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Just done. The villa felt different after the verdict. Lighter, freer, as though it had been holding its breath for months and could finally exhale. I threw myself into repairing small things I had ignored during the trial. Repainting the porch railing, planting a new row of roses in the garden, fixing the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom. Each nail hammered, each brush stroke of paint felt like reclaiming not just the house, but myself. Neighbors stopped by more often, bringing casseroles and pies, offering quiet congratulations. "You fought for this place," Mrs. Thompson told me one afternoon, standing at the edge of my driveway, "and it shows." I smiled, blinking back tears. Of course, The silence from my parents never lifted. No phone calls, no visits, just a void where family used to be. And maybe that was the hardest part, realizing that even in victory, I had lost something I could never get back. But as weeks turned into months, I began to understand. Maybe what I had lost wasn't family at all, but an illusion of it, a version of them that had never truly existed. What I had gained, however, was undeniable. I had stood my ground. I had refused to be erased. I had kept the home I built with my own hands, and most importantly, I had kept myself. On a warm spring evening, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, watching the sun sink over the Portland hills. The garden below glowed in shades of pink and gold. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about court dates or evidence or betrayal. I was just home. And in that moment, I understood the real victory. It was never about the villa itself. It was about choosing not to let anyone, family or not, write my story for me. And that was my story. In the end, my brother didn't just lose a lawsuit. He lost the mask he had been hiding behind. The truth came out, and I kept my villa. But more than that, I kept my dignity, my voice, and the proof that no one has the right to erase me. Family should mean love and protection. But sometimes, family is where betrayal begins. And when that happens, you have to choose. Stay silent or stand your ground. I chose to fight. And I hope my story reminds you that your hard work, your truth, and your place in this world are worth defending, no matter who tries to take them away. Thank you for watching. If this touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share this story, because your voice matters, and it always has.